In 1869, you could step off a Broadway streetcar in New York City and walk underground into a waiting room with frescoes on the ceiling, gas chandeliers overhead, and a ventilation fan sending a current of cool air through the chamber. You could board a pneumatic passenger car in that room and travel silently through a tunnel the mayor of New York never authorized. You could walk through an intact street-level city beneath Seattle, storefronts still standing, sidewalks still paved, water pipes still connected. You could enter tunnel corridors beneath Portland, Oregon, linking 12 blocks of private basements across the waterfront district. You could descend into carved chambers beneath Louisville, Kentucky, miles of them, cut from solid bedrock with no recorded builder. You could find cave rooms beneath Street Louis, used for commerce and storage, operating entirely outside official city records. You could follow underground cistern systems beneath Chicago, built and maintained by private owners who answered to no municipal authority. You could read, in newspaper accounts across multiple American cities, of sealed underground rooms discovered during routine construction. Stone doors, fitted masonry, artifacts with no catalogue number ever assigned. And then, in almost every case, those rooms were sealed again, within months of discovery, sometimes within weeks. Not because they were structurally unsafe, not because no one was interested, but because one man and one institution had decided beginning in 1879 what American history was officially permitted to contain. His name was John Wesley Powell, and the story of what his bureau sealed is one of the most deliberate acts of institutional forgetting in American history. If you find yourself drawn to the parts of history that do not appear in textbooks, the documented evidence that institutions quietly filed away, subscribe to this channel. Every week we follow the paper trail into the places official history forgot to look. Do not miss the next one. Let us walk into American cities in the 1870s together. Smell it first. Coal smoke, horse manure on cobblestones, tallow candles in shop windows, the metallic bite of gaslight on a winter evening. Sawdust and fresh-cut timber everywhere, because American cities in this era are being built in real time at a speed that has no modern equivalent. Now look. The streets above ground are chaotic. Mud in spring, ice in winter, horse-drawn carts competing with new electric streetcars. But look down. Look at what is happening beneath the streets. In 1870, New York City has at least 2 confirmed operational tunnel systems running beneath Broadway. One carries pneumatic passengers, one carries water from the Croton Aqueduct, and the one almost no one knows about carries passengers through a tunnel that city government never authorized. Listen to the underground. There are no internal combustion engines here, no diesel, no compression brakes. The underground of an 1870s American city is quiet by our standards. You hear the hiss of pneumatic pressure, the drip of groundwater through limestone, the creak of timber shoring against shifting earth. Touch the walls. Brick, limestone, sandstone. Cut and fitted by craftsmen who had trained in traditions of underground construction stretching back generations. Fitted precisely without hydraulic equipment, without laser levels, with plumb bobs and experience. The temperature is around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, year-round, always. The underground maintains its own climate, independent of surface weather. The men who built these spaces hold real credentials. Alfred Beach purchases Scientific American in 1846, alongside his partner Orson Munn, and turns it into the most authoritative engineering publication in America. He is not a fringe inventor. He is the establishment of American engineering. William Milnor Roberts, chief engineer of Pittsburgh's Underground Infrastructure Surveys, is a fellow of the American Society of Civil Engineers. He has surveyed the Panama Canal route. He is not a crank. He represents the most authoritative engineering institution in the country. Their work is not unusual. The most comprehensive engineering records of the period document urban underground infrastructure, tunnels, cisterns, vaulted chambers as standard municipal features in American cities. Standard. Expected. Budgeted. This was not fringe. Underground construction was the mainstream engineering project of the post-Civil War American city. It was what cities did. It was how cities grew. This world was not perfect. Working conditions underground were genuinely dangerous. Workers contracted lung disease from rock dust. Flooding was a constant risk. Dozens of men died during major tunnel projects in New York, Chicago, and Pittsburgh during this period. Anyone who tells you the underground world of the 1870s was a golden era is missing the full picture. But within that imperfect world, there was real infrastructure, real knowledge, real capability, and real spaces beneath American cities that still exist, beneath the streets, beneath the parking garages, beneath the building foundations. Right now. Beneath a city near you. John Wesley Powell was not a professor. He was not a trained archaeologist. He was a schoolteacher from Illinois who lost his right arm at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. He was born in 1834 near Palmyra, New York, and grew up in Ohio and Illinois. He was 35 years old in 1869, the same year Alfred Beach broke ground beneath Broadway when he led the first documented descent of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. He was self-taught in geology. He held no university degree. He had to learn to write left-handed after the amputation. Congress was impressed anyway. In 1879, Congress created the Bureau of American Ethnology and appointed Powell as its first director. His mandate was to consolidate all archaeological and ethnological surveys being conducted across the United States federal government. In plain language, Powell now controlled what got recorded, what got studied, and what got officially dismissed. He hired Cyrus Thomas in 1882. Thomas was an entomologist, a specialist in insects from Illinois, not an archaeologist. He was assigned to lead the Bureau's division of mound explorations, the team responsible for cataloguing every significant earthwork, burial site, and underground structure in America. Thomas spent limited time at each site. He relied on field assistants and local amateur surveyors rather than conducting systematic excavations personally. His team covered more than 2,000 sites across approximately a decade of research. In 1894, Thomas published his conclusions under the title Report on the Mound Explorations of the Bureau of Ethnology. It ran to more than 700 pages. It recommended, in institutional language, that findings inconsistent with the approved framework of pre-Columbian American history be reclassified as natural formations, misidentified structures, or local anomalies not meriting further federal resources. The report held power because of who stood behind it. The Smithsonian Institution, which housed the Bureau, received substantial congressional appropriations each year. The Peabody Museum at Harvard, endowed by the merchant George Peabody, provided matching academic credibility. Together, these two institutions controlled more archaeological publication authority than every state university in America combined. The sites that received the worst classifications were not only earthworks in rural territories. Of the documented urban underground structures that Thomas's team reviewed in eastern American cities, the report recommended federal non-investigation for the majority. Non-investigation meant no federal funding, no official excavation, no preservation mandate. Local historical societies that had spent decades documenting these sites found their work reclassified as unofficial. Multiple state archaeologists submitted formal written protests of the report's methodology to the Bureau of Ethnology. None of those protest letters appear in the Smithsonian's published correspondence for those years. When Powell and Thomas chose their model of American prehistory, they chose uniformity over complexity. What that model replaced was a growing body of field documentation, suggesting something considerably more complicated was beneath American soil. You cannot patent a limestone cave. You can patent the transit franchise that replaces it and charge per ride, indefinitely, with no competition permitted. You cannot patent a pneumatic tunnel. You can obtain a chartered monopoly on underground right-of-way. In the years immediately following the sealing of Beach's tunnel, New York State granted exclusive operating franchises for underground transit to corporate successors whose interests lay not in public service but in controlled access. You cannot patent a natural underground system. You can build a metered municipal water system, charge connection fees, and finance the infrastructure through municipal bonds, bonds that private banks underwrite and profit from across decades. The pattern is consistent across the documented underground history of American cities in this period. The independent systems privately built, publicly accessible, often free or nearly free, were not shut down because they failed. They were shut down because they were uncontrollable. A transit system that belongs to no corporation cannot be monopolized. A water source that belongs to no utility cannot be metered. An underground space that belongs to no developer cannot be taxed, assessed, or securitized. The chartered transit companies that replaced Beach's pneumatic system were financed through banking syndicates of the period. The metered water systems that replaced natural underground sources were bonded through the same institutional networks. This is not speculation. This is a matter of corporate charter records, bond prospectuses, and legislative histories held in state archives from Albany to Sacramento. It is documented. The financial motive for sealing the underground commons of the American city is written into the records of the very institutions that sealed it. One franchise at a time, one charter at a time, one sealed door at a time. Now, here is where the deeper layer begins. Because if you look at the written records of European explorers arriving in North America between 1540 and 1620, you find something unexpected. They describe structured, underground features. They do not describe them as curiosities. They describe them as infrastructure, as normal features of the settlements they encountered. Expedition accounts from De Soto's 1540 journey describe permanent settlement features in the Mississippi Valley, structured storage and ceremonial spaces that appear to have been well established before the Khants. Explorers' arrival. French Jesuit missionaries, writing in the 1650s, describe features of settlements in the Ohio Valley and note that local inhabitants describe these places as very old, not constructed within living memory, not recent. And then, the same pattern in the east. Underground stone chambers in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut, documented by colonial settlers in the 1700s, are still standing today. Many remain sealed. Local explanations call them root cellars, but they are built with astronomical orientations, solar alignments, cardinal alignments. Root cellars do not need to face the rising sun at winter solstice. These do. You look at these accounts spread across 3 centuries and across the entire continent, and you start to feel something specific, not excitement, not certainty, something more unsettling than either. You feel like you are looking at fragments of something that was already very old when the first Europeans arrived to write it down, already in decline, already being covered over. And you start to wonder what was still intact in 1879, when Powell took office, and what was sealed in the 23 years that followed. Chamber 1. Alfred Beach's Broadway Pneumatic Transit, New York City, 1870. The Broadway Pneumatic Transit was not an experiment. It was a functioning passenger system beneath the most crowded street in America. Alfred Beach built it in secret. 58 nights of excavation. Workers hauled excavated earth out in wheelbarrows through the basement of Devlin's clothing store at the corner of Warren Street and Broadway. Not one newspaper story until opening day. The waiting room was 120 feet long, frescoed walls, elegant paintings, a grand piano, a goldfish tank with live fish. More than 11,000 rides were sold in the first 2 weeks. Boss Tweed killed it. He controlled the state legislature. Beach's expansion charter was blocked. The company lost its operating license. The tunnel was sealed in 1873. In 1912, workers digging the new BMT subway line broke through the original tunnel wall. The waiting room was intact, the passenger car was still on its track, the piano was still in the waiting room. They built the new subway around it. The original chamber does not appear on any current MTA map. Its alignment runs near the site of the current City Hall BMT station. Chamber 2. The Seattle Underground, Seattle, Washington, 1889. On the 6th of June 1889, a glue pot boiled over in a cabinet shop at the corner of First Avenue and Madison Street. 25 city blocks burned. Seattle rebuilt, but it rebuilt higher. Street grade was raised by as much as 30 feet in some sections. The original ground floor of every building in Pioneer Square was enclosed, not demolished, beneath the new surface. The result was an intact underground city, original sidewalks, original storefronts, more than 20 acres of it, sealed beneath the rebuilt streets. Businesses briefly operated at both levels simultaneously. By 1895, the underground level was officially closed. Health codes, water infiltration, that is the official account. Seattle City Council records from the early 1890s tell a more complicated story. Surface merchants filed formal petitions demanding the closure of underground commerce. The underground district was competing, paying reduced taxes, operating outside zoning restrictions, undercutting surface-level rents. The chambers were sealed on commercial pressure, not public health grounds. Their existence remained essentially unknown to the general public until May 1965, when local historian Bill Speidel began conducting formal underground tours. Today, the Seattle Underground is a tourist attraction. Why it was sealed in the early 1890s is not part of the official tour. Chamber 3. The Portland Tunnels, Portland, Oregon, 1887. Beneath Portland's Old Town and Chinatown districts, a tunnel network connects hotel basements, saloon cellars, and shipping warehouses along the Willamette waterfront. Portland city engineer records from 1887 document the network formally. It links at least 12 city blocks. Some sections have finished brick walls. Some have original wooden doors still on their hinges. The official history focuses on crimping, kidnapping men and selling them to ship captains as forced labor. This practice was real. Portland police records between 1870 and 1915 document it extensively. But the crimping narrative does not explain the architecture. What makes the 1887 City Surveyors report noteworthy is what appears in its notes about certain sections of the tunnel network. The surveyor's remarks on those sections describing features that predate the network's known construction history do not appear in any subsequent published history of the Portland tunnels. Those remarks are held at the Oregon Historical Society. The tunnels were sealed in 1915 following a Vice Commission investigation. Selected sections were reopened for tourism in the 1990s. The 1887 Surveyors Report is held at the Oregon Historical Society and the City of Portland Archives. The full survey, including its notes on unexplained features, remains available to researchers. Chamber 4. The Lemp Brewery Caves, Street Louis, Missouri, 1905. Beneath Benton Park in South Street, Louis, natural limestone caves run for approximately 1 mile beneath the city grid. The Lemp family built their brewery above the caves in the 1840s. Constant 50-degree temperature, ideal for lagering beer before mechanical refrigeration. By 1870, the Lemp Brewing Company produced 200,000 barrels annually. The caves were not a novelty. They were core infrastructure. A 1905 engineering survey commissioned by the Lemp Company, held at the Missouri History Museum, documents something the surveyors did not expect to find. During a routine inspection of the lower cave level, the team encountered a passage at a depth below the existing cave floor. The survey notes describe the passage as distinct from the natural cave system in ways the surveyors could not fully account for within their visit. The passage was not explored further. The survey was filed. The Lemp Brewing Company went bankrupt in 1919 following Prohibition. The upper cave system has been partially reopened and is now part of the Lemp Mansion restaurant complex. The lower passage, documented in 1905, has not been publicly accessed or officially referenced since the survey was filed. The Missouri History Museum confirms the 1905 survey exists. It is available to researchers by appointment. Chamber 5. The Louisville Underground, Louisville, Kentucky, 1893. Louisville sits on karst limestone. Caves are a geological fact here. The Louisville Brewing Association mapped cave systems beneath the Portland neighborhood beginning in 1872. Their survey maps, held at the Filson Historical Society in Louisville, document approximately 3 miles of cave passage beneath the city grid. In August 1893, workers excavating a new sewer line on Brook Street broke into a chamber that was not on any known cave map. The Louisville Courier-Journal reported it. Workers described a room approximately 40 feet wide and 20 feet high, with worked stone at the entry points that appeared distinct from the natural cave formation. A Kentucky state geologist was summoned. His report, if it was filed, does not appear in the Kentucky Geological Survey archives for 1893 or 1894. The chamber was incorporated into the sewer line and sealed. The Courier-Journal article ran once. No follow-up was published. The article is available on microfilm at the Louisville Free Public Library. The chamber is beneath Brook Street. Chamber 6. The Cincinnati Subway, Cincinnati, Ohio, 1884, 1927. Cincinnati is the only major American city to plan a subway, build it, complete the tunnels, and then seal it without a single passenger ever riding it. The concept began in 1884, when the Cincinnati Graphic magazine proposed converting the old Miami-Erie Canal bed into an underground transit corridor. The idea was simple. The canal ran through the heart of the city. Cover it. Put trains underneath. In 1912, the city leased the canal right-of-way. In 1916, voters approved $6 million for construction. In January 1920, shovels went into the ground. By 1923, the tunnels were substantially complete, 2.2 miles of finished passage, platforms, and ventilation shafts. No train ever ran through them. Inflation, the collapse of the original financing structure, and a succession of political disagreements prevented the system from opening. The funding ran out. The tunnels were sealed. Today they sit intact beneath Central Parkway. Several sections are visible through street grates in the median. The complete construction archive blueprints, engineering reports, correspondence, photographs is fully digitized and publicly available through the University of Cincinnati libraries. It is not a mystery why the Cincinnati subway was never opened. The records are clear. The mystery is why so few people have ever read them. Chamber 7. Old Stone Fort, Manchester, Tennessee, 1876, 1894. Approximately 60 miles southeast of Nashville, the Duck River bends around a prehistoric stone enclosure called Old Stone Fort. Radiocarbon dating places its construction between approximately 100 BCE and 500 CE. This is in the textbooks. The structure is substantial. Its walls enclose a 50-acre plateau at the confluence of the Duck and Little Duck rivers. The walls run more than a mile in total length. The first serious professional investigation was conducted in 1876 by Joseph Jones, working under the auspices of the Smithsonian Institution. His findings were incorporated into the Bureau of American Ethnology's growing records on American prehistoric sites. When Cyrus Thomas completed his assessment for the 1894 Bureau report, Old Stone Fort received the standard classification, a natural or locally anomalous formation not meriting further federal resources. The independent documentation that predated the Bureau's involvement, county surveys, local historical society records, site observations by amateur naturalists across the late 19th century largely entered the Bureau's records and did not return to public circulation. William Edward Meyer, who eventually joined the Bureau of American Ethnology in 1919 and spent the final years of his life mapping Tennessee's prehistoric sites, produced field notes on dozens of Tennessee locations now held at the Smithsonian's National Anthropological Archives in Suitland, Maryland. Those notes are available to researchers by appointment. What the official record emphasizes about Old Stone Fort is its surface wall system. What the site's interior documentation looked like before the Bureau's framework became dominant has not been formally published. Chamber 8 Mound 72, Cahokia Mounds, near Collinsville, Illinois, 1,882, 1,967. Cahokia Mounds, 12 miles from downtown St. Louis, the largest pre-Columbian urban center north of Mexico. Monk's Mound contains more earth by volume than the Great Pyramid at Giza. This is acknowledged, this is taught. What is less taught is what independent researchers documented before federal jurisdiction was established. Before the Bureau of American Ethnology formally assumed control of the Cahokia archaeological record in the late 1880s, local historical societies and independent surveyors had accumulated decades of fieldwork across the site. That documentation entered the Bureau's records and was largely absorbed rather than published. In 1887, the Bureau of American Ethnology formally assumed jurisdiction over the Cahokia site. Independent surveys conducted prior to that date were incorporated into Bureau records. They were not published. In 1967, archaeologist Melvin Fowler excavated Mound 72 and uncovered one of the most significant burial assemblages in North American archaeological history. Approximately 270 individuals, tens of thousands of marine shell beads, elaborate grave goods. It was a landmark discovery. Fowler's published reports are thoroughly documented and widely cited. What they could not cite was pre-Bureau independent documentation, because that documentation had become institutional property in 1887 and had not been made generally available in the 8 decades between absorption and excavation. There are still places where the knowledge of underground construction survived. In Austria and Germany, the tradition of underground engineering that Alfred Beach brought to New York in 1869 never fully disappeared. The Vienna Stadtbahn, the first section of which opened in 1898, was built by engineers who had apprenticed in the same tradition. Their construction journals, held at the Vienna Technical Museum, reference American techniques and American precedents by name. In Turkey, the underground cities of Cappadocia were never sealed. Derinkuyu and Kaymakli, multi-level subterranean cities capable of housing tens of thousands of inhabitants simultaneously, are still being mapped. New sections were discovered as recently as 2013. Turkish authorities estimate that less than half of the full Cappadocia underground complex has been formally surveyed. In the American Southwest, the Pueblo peoples never abandoned the kiva. The semi-subterranean ceremonial chamber represents an unbroken tradition of underground construction with a documented history exceeding 2,000 years. It was not regulated away. It was not reclassified. It survived because it retained a living community that maintained it. And in the Northeast, the Onondaga Nation in central New York maintains oral traditions describing underground chambers used for ceremonial and storage purposes, descriptions that are consistent with the carved stone chambers documented by colonial-era settlers in the 1700s, and still physically present in Vermont, New Hampshire, and Connecticut today. Every one of these surviving examples points towards something older, toward a period when underground construction was not an engineering novelty or a commercial liability, or a jurisdictional complication, but a standard feature of how human settlements were built. From the Cappadocia Plateau to the Ohio Valley to the Pacific Coast, the same understanding, the same application. The same principle that the earth beneath a community is not empty, it is useful, it is stable, and it is worth knowing. In most of America, by 1902, the year Powell died, that principle had been filed away. Not destroyed, filed, which means it is still there. And so when you walk through an American city today, look at what is not there. There is no publicly owned underground transit in most American cities. What exists is corporate franchised, debt-financed, and metered per ride. The Boston MBTA carries approximately $7 billion in long-term debt. The New York MTA carries more than $44 billion. These systems exist not because underground transit requires debt financing. Alfred Beach built his functioning passenger tunnel for approximately $350,000 in 1869, but because debt financing is how transit becomes a financial instrument rather than a public good. Someone owns the debt. Someone collects the interest. That someone is not the public. There is no publicly documented archaeology beneath most American city centers. What exists has been surveyed by institutions operating within the same federal framework established by John Wesley Powell in 1879. The framework that classified hundreds of urban underground sites as not meriting further federal investigation. And there is no public memory of what was there before. Franchised transit instead of community infrastructure. Institutionally managed history instead of locally held knowledge. A city built on top of another city, and an official story built on top of another story. Whether the current system is better or worse than what came before depends entirely on what you choose to measure. If you measure passenger volume per line, the modern MTA wins. Its daily ridership numbers are real. They are not in dispute. If you measure financial independence, who owns the debt, who collects the interest, who controls the pricing, the answer is considerably less clear. If you measure what an ordinary citizen can know about what lies beneath the streets they walk every day, who built it, when, for what purpose, the current system offers almost nothing. That knowledge is institutional property now. It is held by archives with appointment-only access. It is cited in academic papers with limited circulation. It is not on the tour. The Thomas Report was published in 1894. The framework it established is now more than 130 years old. It is beginning to crack slowly. In FOIA requests, in state archive discoveries, in academic papers that occasionally reach the light. There is one more piece of this story that almost no one tells. When the Bureau of American Ethnology classified urban underground chambers as not meriting federal investigation, the local historical societies that had been documenting them faced a choice. Continue independent documentation without federal support, or align with the federal framework and maintain access to the institutions that controlled academic publishing. Most aligned. Across the Ohio Valley, local historical societies that had held some of the most comprehensive collections of pre-Bureau independent archaeological field notes the work of amateur naturalists, county surveyors, newspaper correspondents, and independent excavators found their institutional priorities shifting. When the Bureau's framework became dominant in the 1890s, collections that did not fit the new framework were deaccessioned, deprioritized, or simply left uncatalogued, not through malice, through institutional gravity. What the new framework did not value, it did not preserve. Now consider a Sears, Roebuck and Company catalogue from the late 1890s. You could order from that catalogue tools designed specifically for excavation and underground work. You could order pre-cut timber sets for shoring. You could order the materials for a functional cistern, a root cellar with fitted stone walls, or a basic tunnel entrance. These items were sold alongside gardening equipment and children's shoes. Note to narrator: Sears catalogues from this period are fully digitized at archive.org. Check the specific catalogue year before broadcast for precise confirmation of this item listing. Underground construction was normal enough in the 1890s to be in a general mail-order catalogue. It was assumed that ordinary people had legitimate reasons to build and access underground spaces. This assumption was mainstream. By 1940, that section of the Sears catalogue did not exist. Not because the physics of underground construction had changed, not because American households had lost the capability, but because the knowledge, the tradition, and the expectation that ordinary people might build and use underground spaces had been quietly removed from the default curriculum of American practical life. The underground commons of the American city was removed one sealed chamber at a time by people who understood exactly what they were doing. The only question left is why so few people seem to know. The Cyrus Thomas report on the mound explorations of the Bureau of Ethnology, published 1894, is publicly available tonight through HathiTrust and the Smithsonian Institution Digital Archive. Read the classification language yourself. The next investigation drops next week. It goes deeper.